Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. If you're not getting your political news from AMAC, then you won't be informed about American politics, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. I think we all need the cutting edge right now, and to all of our AMAC'ers listening, thank you so much for being with us. The current is getting faster as we approach Election Day, and today we have with us two incredible guests, Bobby Charles and Frank Gaffney. Now, both men are experts in our threats to national security, as well as in the areas of international affairs, counterterrorism, and criminal justice. So we're going to play a little bit of ping pong here, letting Bobby and Frank both bring us up to speed on a looming threat, one that the next Congress must deal with. And that is Communist China's direct collision course with free people everywhere, especially here in America. Frank, I want to dive right in with a real-time question for you. We have been witnessing the Chinese Communist Party National Congress, and you have been tracking that closely. We're watching China change in front of our eyes, going from a stealthy, clever, under-the-radar adversary to an open, no-holds-barred, aggressive adversary. They seem to see Biden as weak, unable or unwilling to hold them back, just as Biden let Afghanistan go and is disengaged on so many issues. So, Frank, what do you make of China's newly aggressive posture? What is happening at this Communist National Congress?
What has been happening in the Party Congress, it's now concluded, is that we've seen the mask formally removed from what Deng Xiaoping, a longtime General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party back in the early 1990s, described as the strategy of China. It came to be known as hide and bide, by which he meant that they would stealthily, as you say, seek to increase their power with the help of the West by concealing, temporarily at least, the true intent of the acquisition of all that power, namely, ultimately, to displace the West and to become the dominant power in the world, including removing the United States as the impediment to the realization of those goals. Xi Jinping, the present General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, basically used this Party Congress to showcase a new, much more powerful, much more aggressive China than we saw during Deng Xiaoping's time. And he is now I call him the first communist Chinese emperor for life, in all likelihood. And that means that you'll have not only all that power, but also the ambitions of a man who's made no secret of using it to achieve the same end that Mao and Deng Xiaoping and other leaders of China have long had, which is to restore China's rightful place in the world as the Middle Kingdom, they call it, the dominant power, and all others will be subordinate to it, including us.
Oh, boy. This is important stuff. Thank you so much, Frank. Bobby, you've been in the thick of America's battle against communism, not just time in the Reagan and Bush 41 White House, but also spending time behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union and other oppressed locations. And you've been to Taiwan, where freedom is always under pressure in the shadow of communist China. How serious is the threat from China today, in your view, and how should the next Congress fix it?
Yeah, so those two questions actually are well paired because the next Congress must address this threat, and Frank has been very articulated about it, as have you, Rebecca, and many on the AMAC team. You know, maybe three very simple, quick points to give you an answer there. The first is that in life, we often, and with China in particular, we've watched things change, but it's like a child growing up. Unless you go back and look at the wall and the little marks on the wall, you don't realize how much they've grown in a period of time. China has, in the last 40 years, gone from being essentially a large, underdeveloped and largely undeveloped country to being, with our technology, which they've stolen and been given, with our money, which they've stolen and been given, and with the manipulation of the world markets, they have acquired to themselves the power to hit that tipping point where they are not only growing, but they have, and I say can hit, they are hitting the tipping point. They're at that tipping point right now. So point number one is it's easy to look at something that you've imagined as docile or benign or at least not malicious and say that it's more or less what it always was. But there come points in time where the quantitative change becomes a qualitative change, and that's what's happened with China today. China is an absolute, unequivocal threat to the United States, to the liberty of every American. And rather remarkably, there's a national security strategy that was just released, which is it looks like it's written by an ostrich whose head's in the sand. They don't seem to have any awareness of how significant. They just want to sort of paper over the tipping point that's occurred. The second thing I want to point out is a very simple historical observation, and it is this. Mao studied very closely Stalin. He looked at what Stalin was doing and wanted to adopt it to the Chinese model into China. Xi very much so. Mao admired Stalin. Xi admires Mao and quotes from him and thinks of this guy who killed, tens of millions of people as his hero. And I now say how remarkable that we not only see this happening in China, that we have essentially a 2.0 version of Stalin kind of coming to the fore, nicely dressed, wears a business suit. When he's going to remove people from the party Congress, he doesn't just kill them on the spot. He removes them with gentility, I guess. But reality is that this is a communist leader who is as illegitimate as all of the Soviet leaders were illegitimate. And that's because communism, as a way of controlling people, is illegitimate. And the last point is, again, a very simple one. Oh, by the way, to that point, here's Joe Biden throwing compliments to an alternate system, which is exactly the mistake that was made before Reagan came along and said, time out. We don't call communism an alternate system. It is an illegitimate way of oppressing people, and that's all it is. And it's wrapped in ideology, and we have to be careful because the snake slithers, and it's headed this way too.
So let me ask you, Frank, what can the next Congress do?
Well, the first thing, and I think Bobby sort of touched on this, the first thing, Rebecca, is to acknowledge that we have a problem. And with your help in the AMAC magazine article I mentioned, we've identified, and it's available also, by the way, in a half-hour video briefing we call The Brief, 6 different steps that this Congress could help get adopted as kind of a course correction that is not what the administration of Joe Biden is up to by any means, but what we need to do. First is to recognize this is a mortal enemy, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. It's a transnational criminal organization. We need to treat it as such, and we need to make clear our purpose is to defeat it, just as Bobby and my old boss Ronald Reagan defeated the last totalitarian communist regime that sought our destruction, the Soviet Communist Party. Secondly, we need to get on a war footing, much as the Chinese have put their society on. That means disengaging from China, yes, freeing ourselves from those supply chains and creating now a basis for, maintaining our own national security capabilities. And thirdly, that means having the capacity to support our friends and allies in this regard as well. The arsenal of democracy, as it was previously called, needs to be reconstituted. And fourth, we need to rebuild our military. It has been deeply, deeply, I think, harmed by, the cumulative effects of a couple of decades of war and failure to modernize, failure to invest. Now the kinds of cultural Marxism that the Biden administration has been waging against the military. All that has to stop, and Congress can help fix that. Fifth, and this is really critical, it's hard, but it's critical, everybody in political office most especially who has been compromised by the Chinese Communist Party must resign. We can't possibly protect ourselves if we've got people playing for the other team running our country in Congress, and certainly in the executive branch. And lastly, a point that I think Bobby again touched on is we have been underwriting much of what the Chinese Communist Party is doing in the way of this unrestricted warfare from us. largely, again, unwittingly, American investors have had their money, their pension funds, their mutual funds, their exchange-traded funds, and other investment vehicles migrated by Wall Street to fund the unrestricted warfare of the Chinese Communist Party, the military buildup, and the rest of it. That has to stop, and I think Congress can make some significant strides in that direction if it is determined to do so. And that's what we really are hoping in this run-up, the last few days of this election, is to ensure that people seeking your vote will agree to take these kinds of steps. This 6-point plan, I think, would make a huge difference to the security of our country and to our children and our children's children.
Oh, thank you, Frank. Bobby, I do want to ask you to help us unpack the broader context. The Biden Pentagon just released their new national security strategy, and they talk about China like we were engaged in a polite, limited, constructive competition with a peer competitor or potential adversary rather than an entity committed to world domination, the way the Soviet Union once was. So let me ask you, on ideological, economic, and military grounds, are we just polite competitors, somehow equally legitimate in our footing, seeking to win over the rest of the world in a fair contest, or is China on a beeline for world dominance?
Yeah, so this, I mean, if we had any question about that, the most recent Communist Congress should have put us right. They are very clear about their desire for world dominance, and they've been creeping toward that for a long time without announcing it. I think you have to take China at its word when it says that's what it's about. You know, they already 15 years ago, they were starting to test space weapons when those are illegal. They were starting to build the artificial islands when those are illegal. They were starting to militarize beyond what was, frankly, had been the international norm. They're preparing right now to lay in 1,000 ICBMs between now and 2030. There's no question that they see this as far more than a polite competition. They see this as an existential, if you know, everybody uses that word these days, but let's just say they see this as a test to see who will win the world. And they believe that their capacity for dominance, that their ability to use all those levers Frank talked about, from economic to ideological to manipulation of currency to essentially buying third-party countries, to leasing and then controlling ports, to controlling territory, to infecting our school systems, to getting into our research institutions, to setting up police stations in this country for them. They think all these things will, in an unrestricted warfare context, will ultimately put them in a position that by the time we wake up and realize that we've experienced a slow motion Pearl Harbor, it will be too late for us to do anything about it. That is their long-term aim. I would like to point out, even if it's not overt appeasement, and in some cases I think in this Biden administration it is overt appeasement, but even if it's not that, you know, even if it's people who just think, well, that's just the innocuous old China that we've always had on the other side of the globe. No, they're not on the other side of the globe. They're in your toaster, okay? They're in your computer. They're in your world. They're in your car. They're in your world. And so, you know, when the ink is in the water, it becomes much harder to get the ink out. And it especially becomes hard if you don't understand that the color of the water is changing and that it's in your water. You need to avert that. You need to stay away from that. And the other thing I'm just going to say is that ideological battles are won and lost by fighting. And if what we say is, now it's just an alternate system, which is what Joe Biden said when he was over there, or we get Kamala Harris, who can't understand the difference between North and South Korea, and North Korea, of course, is nothing more than a protectorate of China, a very dangerous protectorate of China. But the bottom line is, if we don't understand this is ideological warfare, the same way that I think all three of us and many on this call understand the concept of spiritual warfare, if you don't understand that this is a real knockdown, drag out, it's going to end one way or the other battle, then you will lose. And we need to stand up the way Ronald Reagan did, the way Winston Churchill did, and say, we are in the middle of a major ideological conflict. And we are on the right side, not only of history, but of morality and of life. If you believe in the Bill of Rights, all of those, the first 10 rights, the Third Amendment's sort of secondary, but all of those rights, if you believe in those rights, and if you believe in your own freedom and your children's freedom and what this country's made of, you need to stand up and you need to start leading, not waiting for someone else to lead, not walking away from the microphone, but when you get elected to Congress, you need to get in there and start saying what Ronald Reagan was saying in the 1960s and ultimately led to the end of the Soviet Union in the 1980s.
Frank, I want to shift gears and ask you to help us understand where the future could go and what the possible contingencies are. For example, if the U.S. Congress does not start treating the Communist Chinese government as a threat, what could happen? If we telegraph weakness or disinterest, is there a real chance that they'll take our allies away, including from the Solomon Islands, Australia, Japan, Taiwan, to the U.S. allies in the Middle East, even Europe?
Well, let me just say, they're doing all of that right now. That's underway, as you say, from the Solomon Islands to Saudi Arabia. It's very much afoot. In fact, one of the most interesting things about what the Chinese have been up to, again, made possible, I believe, with our underwriting, Rebecca, is they have been building out a colonial infrastructure around the world. They call it, Xi Jinping does, the Belt and Road Initiative. By some estimates, about 145 of the world's 193 countries have signed up to one degree or another to be part of mostly payday loans being made by the Chinese communists, meaning loans that seem very attractive, but ultimately are unsustainable. And that will become clear in due course. In some nations it already has. But using such funds, the countries have been provided by the Chinese with ports, with airfields, with road networks, with railway networks, with access to minerals and export markets and the like. And when those payday loans go bad, as they largely inevitably do, China forecloses on those assets, which creates essentially the opportunity to both sort of use them as bases for colonizing those countries and ultimately for projecting power as well. So that is now happening in various places throughout Africa, through much of the Central Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, yes, as well as Latin America, and a little bit in Europe too. So this is afoot, and quite apart from the perception that the United States is a declining power, which the Chinese are clearly encouraging, and we're giving a fair amount of evidence of in our own right, thanks to Joe Biden. All of this reinforces the idea that you're better off being on the Chinese side than on our side. And to your question about how does this all end, the real concern that I have, and we've done a book on the subject we call the CCP is at war with America. And it makes the point that in addition to everything we've talked about to this point, in addition to all of that unrestricted warfare stuff, one of the things that the Chinese deliberately unleashed against us sometime in 2019, and the dates vary depending on who you're talking to, but in the fall for sure of 2019, they launched deliberately, intentionally, and malevolently a biological warfare attack against our country and, well, for that matter, the rest of the world. This is in the form of that SARS-CoV-2 virus, the impetus behind the COVID-19 pandemic. And what's so important about that, Rebecca, is I mentioned Deng Xiaoping earlier in the program. One of the things we're told about 20 years ago by a guy who was at the time the defense minister of China, a general by the name of Chi Haotian, is that Deng Xiaoping, then the general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, directed this illegal, by the way, illegal biological warfare program of China to have as its mission depopulating the United States so that it could be colonized by the Chinese. And sadly, you ask about the scenario, I think that what we saw with this pandemic was a proof of concept by the Chinese that they could do just that. And that was with a relatively innocuous virus, not one of the really malevolent ones, which we believe they're also working on with gain-of-function technology, know-how, and funding they've received from us, unbelievably, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology specifically. So that's the kind of scenario that I think just reinforces everything we've said to this point. We are facing mortal peril from enemies determined to destroy us. And the thing that I think makes that biological warfare threat particularly attractive to the Chinese Communist Party, I talked about infrastructure build-outs, is you could kill all of the people, or enough of them, and leave intact most of that infrastructure to be colonized and put to use by the Chinese. So this is a real problem. It's why Congress needs to be given a mandate to get serious and alter course. And Joe Biden and those who have been compromised by the Chinese communists like him need to be out of office and replaced by patriotic Americans seeking to protect our country against this great danger.
Thank you, Frank. This is truly serious stuff. Bobby, I want to turn to you now and ask for your view on the chance that China makes a move in the near term, begins physically, economically, ideologically seeking to knock off U.S. allies, reversing all of the history made, freedom won by America in and after World War II. Are we not realizing the risk and speed with which China is moving? I think that we've uncovered that we're not, or those in leadership are not. But should we be beating the drum for freedom now and talking about China the way Ronald Reagan once talked about the Soviet Union? I know that that's our hope here at AMAC. It's one reason why we do this show.
What a great question to end, Rebecca. Really and truly, unity of this nation in response to external and internal threats is really the order of the day. I mean, we all worry about inflation and we worry about a lot of other things. But in reality, if we can't protect the security of this country as one unit, all of us believing that the borders matter, believing that our capacity to communicate matters, and more importantly, realizing that there are foreign entities that are ready to take advantage of us at every turn, and China's the biggest and the most obvious one. If we can't unify, then we essentially open the door to allow them to come in and to do whatever they want here, and ultimately to corrupt our political system and to undermine democracy and to undermine your rights and my rights and the rights of every listener out there. So, at the end of the day, what can we do? I think we need to it's like anything else. When something arrives at your doorstep, you may not be able to control that it got there, but you can control how you react to it. And what we have to understand about China is that they are at our doorstep and they are in our front foyer, and they want every room in the house, okay? And we need to say, wait. We don't let this happen. We will not let this happen. We as Americans are Americans first. You can't divide us as Republicans and Democrats. You can't divide us by some other group identity or turn us into something we're not. We are believers in individual liberty, and we will in a unified way, we will fight to defend those liberties, whether you're on the left or the right or the up or the down. We're about the fact that America is unique in the world. We are the only pluralist country that puts pluralism, the idea that you matter as an individual first and your freedoms are what define you, not your skin color, nothing else. We put that first. We have always put that in this century. We have worked very hard to bring that to the fore in the last 2 centuries. So I think the bottom line is, Rebecca, we have to realize what the threat is, and we just have to be cognizant that if we do nothing, as Edmund Burke always said, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. We cannot be those good people who do nothing. We have to step up, elect the right people, and then demand of them that they step up for our rights.
Bobby, thank you so much. Both you and Frank are two of the best minds in this battle. You're true patriots. You've been through the larger fight for freedom for a long time, and we are here at AMAC so glad to have you out there on our team. We're glad, Frank, that you are constantly reminding us that national security matters, that China is a direct threat to those who want to live in freedom, and that we have to get active. And Bobby, thank you to you as well for your depth, your unapologetic patriotism, love of country, and thoughtful approach to these issues, and for being our national spokesman for AMAC. And I also want to thank all of our AMAC members and all of you tuning in. Thank you. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can listen to more like this one by heading to our YouTube channel or visiting us at bfapodcast.us. You can also listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, or by downloading our free AMAC News app. And don't forget to follow us wherever you are on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.